In this video, we're going to talk about how to study for the MPT at the last minute. So first things first, we know that it's not ideal to find yourself cramming for the MPT or trying to prepare for it at the last minute. Because remember, the MPT is worth 20% of your uniform bar exam score. It's definitely not something that you want to put off. But if you find yourself kind of scrambling at the last minute, you are cramming and you're trying to figure out what to do at the last minute to maximize your chances of success, here are some tips for you. So our first tip is to simply make sure that you're familiar with the types of tasks that you could see on the MPT. This is the surest way to not only get you a little bit of confidence, but to make sure that you're not really surprised by anything on the day of the exam. So remember that your MPT will have what we call a task memo. It's essentially your instructions. It tells you what you're supposed to be doing. It also contains a file. Here's where you find facts that you're supposed to be using for your case. And it also contains a library, which consists of the law that you're supposed to be using to answer the task at hand. So your job is to follow the instructions that are provided using the law and the facts given. Usually, the instructions will tell you to perform some sort of task. And those most commonly tested tasks are things like objective memos, persuasive briefs, opinion letters, demand letters, and of course, things that we like to call wildcard tasks or odd tasks. Things like, leave behind memos, contract provisions, arbitration clauses, parts of a complaint. But these odd tasks or wildcard tasks are not that heavily tested. But again, it's good to know and understand what things they have asked historically. So being familiar with the types of tasks that you might be faced with is your first step to cramming for the MPT, so to speak. Our second tip, if you find yourself studying for the MPT at the last minute, is to be very familiar with the most common MPT tasks. So while our first tip was saying, be aware of what they could ask of you, our second tip is taking that an additional step. We're saying we don't want you to just be familiar with those highly tested tasks. We want you to be comfortable with them. And that's because the persuasive brief and objective memo are the most highly tested MPT tasks. And it's likely that you'll receive both or at least one on your MPT day. So if you're very comfortable with these types of tasks, you're putting yourself in the best position possible to be successful on this portion of your bar exam. So let's talk about that objective memo first. So first of all, the objective memo is statistically speaking the most popular or highly tested MPT task. And usually, for purposes of this MPT, you're an associate addressing the memo to a supervising attorney. So it's your boss telling you to draft them a memo, essentially. And the point of this objective memo is to be, objective. You're not supposed to be advocating for one side, but instead, essentially, your boss has asked you to point out the strengths and the weaknesses of some sort of issue. For an objective memo, it's important that you have good formatting because you'll get points for good formatting. And a basic objective memo always has a caption, which is basically where you outline who is it to, who is it from, the date, and the matter. It has a basic introduction. It has a discussion section, which is where the bulk of your information that you provide will fall with separate headings, and then it will contain a conclusion. Turning next to a persuasive brief, the next most highly tested MPT task. Persuasive briefs are different than an objective memo because persuasive brief is actually asking you to advocate on behalf of a client. And usually you're submitting it to your boss who's going to submit it to court, or you're submitting this brief to court yourself. So here you really do want to make sure you're using persuasive language versus objective. Generally, you want to include things like captions, statements of the case, or statement of facts only if the instructions tell you to, and usually they tell you to omit them. So usually your persuasive brief simply consists of your legal argument, which you should have separate headings under your legal argument to address whatever you're supposed to be addressing, and then we'll have a conclusion. So again, formatting of these highly tested MPT tasks is very important. Our third tip to help you cram at the last minute for the MPT is to remember the importance of carefully reading your task memo. That task memo is the most important document probably in your whole MPT because it tells you what you should be doing. A huge part of your points on the MPT is following instructions. So make sure you are consulting that task memo as many times as necessary. Our fourth tip for cramming for the MPT is read the library. And when you read the library, pay attention to the following. So first of all, if you're given statutes, please note that not every portion of the statute will be relevant to your issue. And in fact, they might give you cases that help you interpret parts of the statute. Usually that means it's important to the facts that are provided. You do not have to address those irrelevant portions. When it comes to cases, always look to see how the legal rule is applied to specific facts, and your job is to kind of weigh in on the differences between your facts and the facts in the case. If you can do that, that means you're paying very good, close attention to what's being provided to you in that library. And our last tip for cramming for the MPT is when you read the file, pay close attention to the facts. Remember, some facts are not always relevant, or you might not need them, or some facts might contradict another fact provided in your file, and that's just life because that's sometimes what happens in a real case. So remember, the key is that you want to look for facts that are similar or distinguishable from the facts that you found in your legal authority in your library. Also, maybe pay attention to how facts can relate to a statute that's provided in your library if you're given a statute. So we know that cramming for the MPT at the last minute is not ideal, but if you find yourself in this position, we hope that these 5 tips that we've given you can help you.